I'm so fortunate that we have Doug O'Connor with us today. And he brings another unique perspective of how harvesting the genitals of infants is illegal. It's illegal on so many levels, and Doug brings a whole new level to it. I'm just going to let him start because really his expertise, and it goes beyond this, is the transporting of an organ from a human being. I'm going to let him go with it. Come on, Doug, bring it.
My name's Douglas O'Connor from San Francisco. And my journey into this, it's been going since about high school. I was going to Catholic high school in San Francisco. I was fortunate enough to make the varsity basketball team. And so my first really exposure to this was showering with a teammate who people had deemed uncircumcised back in the mid 90s. So we went through the whole thing of what I would call circumshaming, where a bunch of people who we misconstrued ourselves as circumcised would be, oh, shoot, it's one of the Dunn. There were two Irish American athletes, the Dunn brothers, I'll call them, on my team. And everybody just knew when they showered in football or basketball, everyone in both sports teams was freaked out. We'll put it that way. I was maybe one of the only teammate that could shower with them openly without wearing his shorts and freaking out. Half the team wouldn't even shower because they did not want to see the quote unquote the turtleneck. So as a young teenager, I'd misconstrued myself as circumcised, believing what was told to me from school or medical authorities, even my own parents. Everyone, I was misconstrued as circumcised. So fast forward to being a young adult, maybe my mid-adulthood, probably my early 30s, I just wound up finding myself in the business of transporting a same-day courier products, which were aircraft on ground. And the other sector we worked in was human organs for transplant. So this was mostly kidneys, hearts, lungs, livers type thing, and some skin and cornea tissue. And during that time, I'd learned the concept of what a living donor is and what organ donation was. And I never had ran into anything of, let's say, a human foreskin or a prep use being used. And around that time I was doing it, this was around the time in San Francisco, they actually had the circumcision ban. So that topic actually came up, and I never put two and two together for almost another 10 years. The foreskin thing it began, someday my subconscious was reaching out to me over this. And I, in fact, named a fantasy football team the Washington Foreskins at one point, right around the time of the San Francisco circumcision ban. So something was resonating with me. I just remember distinctly just being at an open cocktail event, seeing a woman in San Francisco, seeing a woman in a navy blue and white striped dress, thinking maybe she might have been a Greek American or something, and striking a conversation with her. And she told me, no, I'm actually Jewish. Is that okay? I said, well, I'm not Jewish, but I am circumcised. Is that okay with you? And she freaks out and whatnot. And I never really thought anything of it for their 10 years. I looked into the ban and followed it in San Francisco. And I didn't really revisit this until maybe about 10 years later, because I had been, unfortunately, the victim of attending a Catholic high school. I was sexually assaulted during a sports meet where a coach had me share a bed with their male athlete. So I started looking into sexual battery because there was a look back window for about 3 years from 2022, which got blotted out in San Francisco. So in that, I actually had stumbled upon the theory. I'd read Georgina Intact America's website. She alluded to organ trafficking on her page, and she didn't go into much detail. She left the allegation out there. I began to realize too that maybe, just maybe, with what I knew about living donation from being in the courier industry, I really came to the epiphany. Maybe the hospital just stole my prep use under the guise of circumcision. And I think
because we live in a genital cutting culture, and actually we live in a genital harvesting culture, and it's under the guise of it's donated. No child has ever donated his sex organ. It's the parents are donating another person's body part, which is terrible.
It's a proxy consent for living donation. What I saw unearthing is I had actually done some in pro per litigation in San Francisco Superior against Kaiser Hospital. And I just came in there with what my first complaint was, just very generic. It used a lot of stuff, I think, in the activist movement. I agreed with it, but I felt they really didn't answer the solid questions of, okay, why is this going on? And how do you start create legal framework to start dismantling the ongoing enterprise of neonate prep use harvesting under the guise of circumcision? Even to some degree, as I've gone into this more, I'm actually finding out this is actually a problem even post adults, teenagers, adults, men that are being told, hey, you're being circumcised, when in reality, they do have living donor rights they don't even realize they have, because American medical professionals have been involved probably in a 130-year conspiracy to harvest prep uses under the guise of a circumcision. So the bioethics of living donation haven't caught up. They've been applied to every square inch of the body, even the fluids, the blood and the sperm. That would be, those blood and sperm are heavily regulated under donor laws. So everything, even the skin on your inner thigh, it's a typical spot for skin graft. donation. It's everything but the prepuce is being protected by living donor laws. So that's what I'm looking to change with the donor boner movement. It's just
Talk
like I think
about
the
the donor
hashtag.
boner.
So I just came up with it. I figured I love totally Eric Clapper's a really good friend of mine. He's represented me as an attorney on some civil litigation. And I just felt like there was something missing from Intact Global. I realized as a San Francisco taxi cab driver for 5 years, one group that struck out to me that actually was really good at disarming people with humor and visualization was this gay group called the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. They would dress nuns and wear makeup. And one of the things they did, they wore a name tag. So I had them as taxi clients. I would give them taxi rides. So one of them I drove was Sister, may joy be with you, right? So that's what I figured the power of psychologically disarming people when you're getting up a point, whether you agree with the point, I could take that with the South Park method and even the name tags. Mormons will wear name tags when they're actually evangelizing door to door. So that's where I came up with the DB in your last name thing. If I want to do outreach to people, I got to get a shirt that's going to catch the human eye. Brightness is one way to catch the human eye. Catchy hashtag. And people will ask me, hey, what's this? What's it mean? I go into really a brief summary of how plastic surgeons had started this. A Civil War surgeon, P.C. Ramonito, started this in America, in California, after he had co-conspired with some surgeons in London. He had two surgeons he conspired with in the Gilded Age, the late 1880s. One was R.C. Lucas and Chauncey Perpuzzi. They had actually written articles in the Lancet. That's how they started the conspiracy, was through medical journals. They started saying, hey, you got a problem in the ER with a burn victim or a trauma victim, a broken, even they use them for compound fractures on the arms and legs. Just go raid the maternity ward and call it a circumcision. There's your donor skin. Because basically what happens is in the 19th century, European surgeons actually had delved back into the world of skin grafting. So they were doing it, but the big problem for them was they knew about immunological rejection risk. In the case of adults, there was a problem of the skin grafts being rejected, and they didn't have any diagnostic tests to really figure that out. They didn't have leukocyte testing until about 1965. It wasn't medically available. So basically, people are just winging it. The surgeons had the common theory in the early 20th century, late 19th century, was that you have to match the blood type of the donor and the recipient. That would lead to a higher probability of a match. And even if they had done that, they found out that wasn't a 100% guarantee. The one thing they did figure out, though, in this time was that basically stillborn infants, miscarriages and whatnot, and neonate prep use, those are basically those provide the lowest rate of rejection risk.
Right, it's almost pure stem cells. Yes, of course.
Yeah, there's no antigens, there's no protein antigens, and probably about your first years of being, your skin antigens aren't really set. So as from the day you come out from your mother's womb to about year one, there's an inverse relationship to your compatibility as a universal skin donor because there's no antigens, there's no protein antigen expression in the skin. So it's pretty common to read skin grafting articles from 1940. The two main sources were neonate prep use under the guise of circumcision and stillborn children, miscarriages. That would be one of the reasons they actually have closed casket funerals for children for neonates, just is because they harvest all the skin. They make admissions of that in a 1943 journal from two surgeons out of Chicago, which you would have to resort to for a universal skin graft is neonate prep use, or your other choice was to mince the skin from a stillborn, regardless of gender, a stillborn infant.
I'm having trouble trying to breathe right now.
Okay.
Just hearing that. It's bad enough they're harvesting the genitals of infants. Now you're talking about harvesting the entire epidermal layer of a child.
Those were the two sources.
So talk a little bit about how many layers illegal it is to transport the prepuce of a newborn infant, even transporting it.
Basically, there's a few statutes that had come into play in 1968. So after there was publicly acknowledged tissue organ donation, probably around the 1960s and 50s, there was legislation. It was prompted by the Uniform Law Commission. They're not a Congress. But what they did is they actually had a recommendation for the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act, the UAGA, in 1968 after a South African surgeon had done the first open heart transplant. So after that happened, there was the UAGA. So what they did, Congress then recommended the UAGA for every state to codify their own version of the UAGA. And so the UAGA provided the framework for what they call an anatomical gift, which was for someone who was basically it provided the framework for cadaver donation rights for organs and tissues. It also has had subsequent amendments and revisions in 1987 and 2006. And those laws clearly state it does provide a framework for a parent to make an anatomical gift, but it clearly doesn't apply to a living donor scenario where you have a healthy baby boy and harvesting is prep use. It provides more if you're in a car accident, when child's pre-death, brain dead, have a plan for harvesting the whole body for a number of doe recipients. It doesn't provide the framework for them. There's also the federal legislation of 1980. There's NOTA in 1984. That's a National Organ Transplant Act that actually considers the skin in any subpart of the skin an organ and makes it illegal to transport and sell it for profit. Now, has that law ever been enforced on a federal level on behalf of baby boys? Not yet, but the framework is definitely there. If you have a U.S. attorney that wanted to do that, they actually could.
So they're not allowed to sell a human organ for profit.
And under any skin or any subpart of the skin is considered an organ.
The skin is the largest organ of the body, correct?
It considers any subpart, which the subpart would include the prep use, and even in my opinion, that subpart clause would actually cover these cells that they discovered in the 1950s and 60s and 70s to present, the fibroblasts, which are common. That's a common cell that's isolated from a neonate prep use and used for the so-called foreskin facials with Oprah and Sandra Bullock skin. And the other cells they found in the 1960s and 70s, the melanocyte, that would be the part of the skin cell that serves your pigmentation. So that melanocyte is commonly sold by, say, Thermo Fisher Scientific, a publicly traded corporation. And those body parts that skin subpart is rated off of pigmentation. So it could be light pigment, dark pigment, medium pigment.
So this is another level. This is another layer. So the only one I know of is that if you search neonatal.
That's the one for facial creams. That's the one, the most notorious one because of Oprah and Sandra Bullock.
So there's another one.
There's the melanocyte is another one. That's the skin pigmentation cell. And there's also the keratinocyte. The keratinocyte is what's used commonly in wound care products. That's the cell that would make Dermagraft or Apligraf with. That promotes wound healing and stuff. That's what its main role is. And there's also
three. Is there any more? Three?
There's a fourth one that got discovered here in the 20th century.
Neonatal foreskin fibroblasts, the melanocytes, and then what's the other one?
The keratinocyte. Those are the big three of the 20th century.
Keratinocyte.
The keratinocyte. Those are the big three of the 20th century that got discovered I'd say from the 60s to 70s. And then there's another one. It's called the MSC, which is the mesenchymal stromal cells. That's another one. It's an immunological cell, and that's actually been discovered within the last, say, 10 years.
These ones you've just mentioned, anybody basically can go online and order these and have them sent to the house at any time. Obviously, you just search neonatal foreskin fibroblasts and click shopping, and you'll see what we're talking about. And so the other ones, I'm sure, are probably available. How are they limiting access to the actual foreskin themselves?
How is who limiting?
Is that something I can order today, or you could?
Possibly you could. You could try to go in there and you could have their sites. There's even cases where even the federal government is actually involved in selling these used body parts. I actually was able to find in my research, let's see here, I actually have the Coriell Institute that's up in New Jersey that's run by the NIH. It's affiliated with the federal NIH. They actually have a specimen for sale from the 1970s, a Gen X baby, born on January 21st, 1976. They obtained a minced foreskin from a 3-day-old victim, likely born on January 18th. And you can actually go online. You can actually order those cells today, to this present day. And it's been used in maybe that body part has been used. His cells have been used in maybe 50, 60 citations. There are research papers that they were just doing various research with since 1976 to present.
Okay.
It's around the 200th anniversary, close to the 200th anniversary of our country in 1986. People, and to this present day, there's been an ongoing enterprise that even to some degree the federal government get on. Agencies of the federal government are participating in this too. And I think it was probably minced. I'd say it was left over from a skin graft because reading skin graft literature, that was common for what the skin grafting surgeons do. They take this neonate prep use and they would just mince it into little pieces, and then you attach it to little small pieces on a skin graft. So it looks leftover skin grafting material. So and
nothing
the thing is
left
too,
over that was stolen from a child.
Basically, that's what it is. I found out in these articles, we can go back to 1937. Frank Ashley into skin grafts. It's a really good free article that's available on the NIH website. You'll see the same type of rhetoric in these articles, even in the 21st century, where we usually discard this body part, but it wound up every single one of them was used in our case studies, and we need some more. So can we form a network, conspire to help hook each other up, and form a tissue bank, and a black market tissue bank? These have been formed since the early 20th century. So that's basically even PC Rem. I'd say the original purveyor in the United States. He was a medical doctor. He was a surgeon in the Civil War, and his clients were skin graft recipients. So he would go around to the general public promoting circumcision on baby boys, take those harvested body parts and just throw them on his skin graft clients. He would openly pathologize the male prep use. It's really in his book. The good part, if you read his book carefully from just doing any type of litigation, there's enough there to actually say there's a conspiracy within the state of California with multiple co-conspirators. There's a nationwide conspiracy in the United States and an international conspiracy with a surgeon in London.
So he was openly saying in his book that he was specifically harvesting newborn prep use for skin graft.
Yes. And as you go on, and even in fact, even in originally one of his co-conspirators, Dr. Robert Gregg of San Diego, had actually, they didn't use circumstrates back in the day. There were a group of surgeons that were actually using basically a cocaine injection as anesthesia. That was their preferred method back in the Gilded Age. Instead of doing anesthesia through a mask or something like that, they would just use the penile cocaine injection and they would harvest. That's how they would harvest the prep use. And as time went on, probably in the next 30 years, the patent for the circumstrate doesn't really appear publicly until about 1950.
And I have seen children being circumcised who don't feel it in other countries. So in other countries, well, they're not limited by the FDA, they will use enough painkiller for the children to steal their prep use. But to say that the sugar water is a painkiller is asinine when every other research study has admitted that sugar water is a placebo or sugar is a placebo, but yet they'll try and claim it's a painkiller for children.
That's the thing. It actually creates a trauma bond with sugar for the child. When you're having that subconscious going on, you're not really processing something. So for a long time, actually, this really haunted me, this whole issue. Once I think I could really acknowledge the theft of my prep use under the guise of circumcision, I think it's been a really big breakthrough to me as a human being and just even helping out others who have been looking for the answers. I found I've had a lot of breakthroughs with mothers who believe they felt a lot of long-term guilt over what they thought was the circumcision of their son, and just showing them, this is your son's a victim of an organ trafficking conspiracy, and so are you. And I finally really provide them a rational reason as to why this is happening. Whereas I think, with all due respect to some of the original activists, I think wasn't really conveyed enough to have the rational reason. And I think even circumcision, it's actually, I know of cases just having been in child sex abuse circles of people who are deeply fascinated, male assailants that are deeply fascinated with circumcision. And I think they're processing a lot of just unprocessed trauma because they're misconstruing themselves as circumcised, and I think everyone else should be too. I know of a specific case of just even where this one individual who had an obsession with it manipulated a teenager into getting circumcised as a teenager, an intact boy. And that individual who did that, he went on to have all kinds of problems with drugs, domestic violence, and driving under the influence.
Sexual assault starts at infancy with circumcision.
Oh, exactly. It definitely fits the criteria of a sexual battery.
It fits the DSM-5 for PTSD, all the qualifications for PTSD. It meets the acute childhood, the ACE score, acute childhood experience. And so it also, sexual battery, it fits that as well.
Even in Florida, I would say even in Florida, the circumstrate could possibly be a violation of Florida statute 78702, false imprisonment of child under age 13. That would
Speaking of that, what else have you been doing with the legalities in the state of Florida?
Well, I've been starting to do some outreach I did an outreach to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, just presenting the false imprisonment, commercial exploitation of children, and also a violation of 7301, or the tissue and transporting organs or tissues for profit. The buyer, the sale, or the purchase of a tissue for transplant, and just realizing there are certain hospitals in South Florida that seem to have very high circumcision, quote unquote, circumcision rates, harvesting rates. And it'd be interesting to see, I think, with the current Surgeon General and the current administration having 1 year left in their administration, they've been pretty staunch medical freedom advocates. They can take the medical freedom movement all the way. I think this would be the next step in medical freedom in America. It was just the acknowledgement of a man, you have the right to donate your prep use. In fact, you should probably hold on to it to your adult, because some of its uses in a donor capacity as an adult are pretty valuable for, say, a neo-urethra. There's a good article in Denmark that came out around 2021. There was a case of two identical twins, and one of the twins needed a neo-urethra. He had urethra scarring, and the brother was intact. His twin brother was intact. He was uncut, uncircumcised, whatever you want to call it. So he was actually able, just in a European article, the twin brother, as an adult in his early 30s, donated his foreskin prep use to his twin brother, who could again get a neo-urethra procedure. And the problem is, in America, they would have to insert the C word in that conversation. Even an adult, he can't have the dignity of being a living donor, having his medical bills paid for by the recipient. In some cases, in most states, there's lost wages clauses for their paid medical leave for living donors with employers over a certain size. And if that wasn't covered by the employer, then the recipient would step in and cover the lost wages of the donor and any subsequent medical care. So I think going back to your point too about PTSD, it's proven fact that 50% of living donors have PTSD.
Oh, interesting.
These are adult living donors that would do, say, an organ, a liver, or a kidney, and a lot of them suffer from PTSD. So, definitely, I think there's a lot there where there is this whole layer of just fraud and money laundering too associated with the guise of circumcision.
So even though these adults have chosen and with consent gave their one of their organs or part of their organs, still 50% of them still end up with PTSD.
Correct.
So we can imagine that the number is probably higher for someone who did not consent to having.
And then the whole time, his whole life, this victim will be gaslit and misportrayed as circumcised. So what often happens is male victims of this misconstrue themselves as circumcised.
Mm-hmm.
You walk around misconstruing yourself as being circumcised when in fact reality, one of millions of victims of an ongoing enterprise of prep use harvesting and trafficking. That's just really the sad reality of it. And it's just, they've even done studies. There's a really good 2020 research paper, neonatal male circumcision is associated with altered adult sensitive processing. And that study actually shows that
that
actually shows that victims of prep-use harvesting, aka circumcised, tend to have more sexual partners. They tend to be more promiscuous, engage in sensation-seeking activities, whether it be drug, alcohol, tobacco, porn, commercial sex.
So that can go both ways. So I understand people talk a lot about hypersexuality as a result of being circumcised, but for me, it's hyposexuality where I avoid sex because I associate sex with pain. And not only that, there's so much skin removed from my sex organ that it's painful to have an erection. So I just avoid sex altogether. So a lot has been talked about hyper, but for me, it was that it's hyposexuality.
I think I went through that too earlier on too, just even prior to my teenage sexual assault, my sexual battery. I had a romantic encounter with a high school classmate that we were going to play together. So it was off. So she had touched my penis and actually my skin had keratinized and scabbed up because of that. So that was, I went through that too, where I felt, I didn't know at the time. The problem is she was a tennis player, so she had a really strong grip. So that was just a tip for you young guys out there. The tennis players might not be your best bet because they have really strong hands. I went through that too, just the keratinization and stuff like that, not knowing that was a result of a problem. Something I didn't process until I was an adult, looking back and looking at the facts. And maybe my problem wasn't as severe as others, but I definitely experienced that. And it was just interesting to see as an adult. I've seen a few of my turtleneck sports buddies. They're all married with 3 kids, and they're the antithesis of what a circumcised male is. Of this study where they seem to have they've had less sexual partners. So I've seen anecdotally, this makes sense to me. And that's why I've gotten to this movement was just to be like, let's really create a public awareness about this donor inequality.
For me, it's that the circumcised man is always looking for connection and satisfaction with his partner, and which he never finds because he doesn't have his entire sex organ to allow that to happen.
Basically, it's God designed us a certain way to give us these body parts to
interact together. It's a duet.
Interact together and have it. But when people are taking it away, the parts that would make that happen, mm-hmm. and then they just deem you as a recipient of a religious ceremony from a simple excision, from a Judaic excision, that's the problem. Is people aren't being treated. I've had to really sit down, even in this, and really acknowledge my own long-term disability because of this. I've met potential romance who have really been. I'm out here in northern Nevada, so there's common to meet a lot of the women that go to Burning Man types out here, and they view me as disabled sexually because I'm actually cut. We've had that conversation. I'm basically even in through my own processing this over the years, especially the last 3 years. It's like the hospitals don't even have any follow-up care for us. They don't even, when you're amputated, you have an amputated limb or a body part, they would find you, you could get a prosthetic hand, you could get a prosthetic foot, a leg, but they won't provide you with a prosthetic prefuse or even tell you where it is. You're on your own to discover all this. So even one of my most memorable experiences in this process was just going to an adult bookstore. And that's really popular in San Francisco where they have sex toys and whatnot, mostly for women, and just asking this male clerk, okay, I don't have a prep use, a foreskin, whatever you want to call it. Do you have any type of apparatus device that I could wear for my partner that likes that? Do you have any way to help me? He was like, no. And I actually found out it's actually ripped condom. That's probably the cheapest form of a prosthetic device you could have that would duplicate the missing ridge band. And there's other crazier devices I've seen online for sale on Amazon for $40. They're prosthetic foreskins. Okay, so I have to go through the whole thing of sizing myself up, order something for $40, $50 by mail until something fits. Right. So that's the lack of standard follow-up care by these doctors is really disturbing. It's a form of gender-based discrimination. So I think what Eric and Intact Global is doing with the gender-based discrimination, I think we can actually start getting these younger victims that are eligible to go to court and start saying, look, the discrimination has to stop. The lack of follow-up care and whatnot, that's a problem too. When they're not acknowledging this person as an amputee. And it's even interesting too, when you look up the medical standards in American medicine for what's the standard of care for an amputated victim, they consider the amputated body part property of the amputee.
Really?
Yep.
So they don't resell the amputated body part or parts of it.
In their world, they consider an amputee. They only would put that diagnosis on somebody with a missing limb or whatnot, but that would still apply to an amputated prepuce. That's still an amputated body part.
It's still a limb.
That's still a body part, limb, whatever you want to call it. It's still tissue that's attached to you. That's tissue that's your right to donate under the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act. It's not anyone else to go out there and make that decision to donate, except for when you reach the age of consent in your state.
I'm shaking my head over here. We talked about how many laws are broken every time that a child had part of a sex organ amputated. And you just put a whole nother layer onto it where it's actually the amputee's body part. He still owns it.
Yep. And the thing is, a living donor too, the whole process of being a living donor, you have a right to choose your recipient too. And that's being ignored, the right to choose. And even when you get into, when I was an organ courier, same day courier doing an organ, I actually, believe it or not, had a chance to be in a documentary made by Stanford University about a woman who had done an altruistic donation. So they actually filmed me in part of the movie just showing up and picking up her organ in a box and taking it down the elevator. And I actually shipped it out. And so what happened in that, because it was a directed donation, right? What had happened was, there's organ waiting lists for organ recipients. They put on the waiting list. So what had happened was, as she did her altruistic kidney donation, what had happened was the recipient, who was a white man in New Jersey, his Asian wife donated her kidney so he could move up the list. And so we went through the whole thing in her documentary, how she went through leukocyte testing and she found people she wanted to donate to, but they were incompatible after the testing, after they found a match. So what happens to a baby boy when he's not acknowledged and he's a burn victim one day and needs a skin graft? He doesn't get put up on the list. So there's I think there's a lot of virtue signaling, hypocrisy in American. Many of the people that I meet too, after I found this out, a lot of males that are victim of this, dude, I'm not donating blood or organs or anything until they straighten this out. That's been one of my responses to it too, is just to be, why am I going to donate tissue, organs, etc., blood, when no one's even going to acknowledge the theft of my body part as a baby boy?
I should be on the top of the list for receiving.
No one's ever addressed that conversation because they don't recognize us as donors. I was in the case of a burn victim, because you skin graft, how ironic that is, as a quote unquote someone who's misconstrued as circumcised, misportrayed, that you don't even get to move up the list for, say, if you need a skin graft, you have to wait at the bottom of the list. But if
you've already made your donation.
But you already made your donation. It's never been acknowledged. So any follow-up care, even, hey, theoretically,
they can't acknowledge. That's why they don't acknowledge it, because it was a theft in the beginning. They can't acknowledge it.
That's what I'm saying. That's the problem with this whole thing. And so what does that do for a society when we're victimizing a good percentage of our young male population, just gaslighting them for the rest of their lives?
Circumcision is the deepest cut of all. And with Americans with scars on their genitals, how can it
on
not
the reproductive organ?
Say it again.
On their reproductive organ.
Correct.
I started just using that language too, just because I think one of our goals, my goals too, is, even though I had a chance to meet Kason over at the first Impact Global in Portland last year, he talked about how his experience with circumcision, how it would cause depression and unemployment. That would definitely meet the criteria of disability under the ADA, because he had neurological damage and damage to his reproductive organ. But that's not recognized at this point. We've got a lot of work to do. And I think just the donor-boner movement, it's a donor equality movement. I'd even say even some of the people that attended the Intact Global movement, the intersex people, could use the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act as actually the primary cause of action in court. Basically, it's in the removal of these reproductive organs that are very novel. They weren't old enough to donate, to consent to a donation.
What were you saying about
what's the donor equality? It's the Donor Equality Network team.
Donor Equality Network team. Tell me more.
My goal is just to have it create activism and just sport our donor boner t-shirts with a name tag and hand out cards, do slap tag campaigns, and just create a movement about, even one of the things I want to do with this movement is actually not to have a referendum on religious cutting, but I think the religious Jewish and Muslim males, that if they're subject to this, for them to be considered donors too. I want to have an inclusive movement, or it's just anything else. If you donated your blood, your sperm, your kidney, a portion of your skin, I just want the prepuce to be acknowledged, since it's been the most procured tissue organ in American history since the Gilded Age. There's probably millions that have been holding it down. I think we should just get the credit for doing that, and then just bring up the consent procedures back up with every other body part and tissue, every organ tissue, skin, blood, cornea, eye tissue, lungs, to bring that some equality to the table.
The whole thing, circumcision lives in denial. It's denial that it's a surgery. It's denial that they're stealing. There's a denial that they're cutting the genitals. The whole thing is denial.
It's even interesting, too, because you even go into some of the things. One of the more prominent ones, Edgar Shane's name has come up. He was a PC Ramandino of the 20th and 21st century. And even in his book, what you see is despite the fact that the original Gilded Age, they were more transparent about what they were doing in the Gilded Age. This is great. There was no bioethics. But as bioethics comes into play, you can see the cover-up taking place more after the Uniform Anatomical Gift Act was passed. You could see more of, you could read Edgar Shane's book he published, say in the early 2000s. He had actually denied any type of use for this skin. He claimed it was all discarded, despite the fact he was on the AAP. He was the Ode to the Circumcised Male AAP guy from the late 1980s. And he had worked for Kaiser Hospital. He worked for Kaiser Hospital until about the early 2000s.
And in his book, he denies the harvesting of the tissue?
Oh, totally in his book. Let me look up the notes here. Skin grafting. Here's his book. That's Circumcision, Sex, God, and Science, Modern Health Benefits of an Ancient Ritual. So in the back of his book, he actually goes on to state, Edgar Shane is one of the most foremost authorities on all aspects of circumcision in the world, and his new book is a fair, honest, insightful account of the extensive health benefits of this simple procedure. Okay, here it is. This book documents the evidence of major health benefits of this biblical procedure. Okay. So a lot of ways what he's doing, this is the back cover.
Okay.
The back cover of the book, and the last line, he'll actually say this book documents the evidence of major health benefits of this biblical procedure. He's doing the same thing PC Ramandino did. So if you read his book, maybe about pages 7 and 8 of his book, he actually acknowledges PC Ramandino for about 2 pages. What they do, PC Ramandino of his book, he actually has an old school Renaissance illustration of the circumcision of Jesus. When you open up his book, The History of Circumcision, he actually really appropriates the biblical circumcision of Jesus. That's the whole scam with this whole thing. And that's what I think, in my opinion, makes it a sexual battery, is the religious appropriation, because you're actually implying that there's some type of spiritual benefit. It'd be no different than, let's say they have these cases in Utah and Arizona where these rural Mormons will maybe have 5 wives that are 12 years old and claim it's divine intervention or some type of perceived spiritual benefit. So I think that's where the appropriation of circumcision to describe this, I think that element does create a strong case for sexual battery.
That's for sure. How can you possibly manipulate the sex organ of a child and it not be sexual battery?
Especially when it's done under the guise of a spiritual ceremony. Really what had happened, as I researched this, how this mix of religion and medicine came to be was with the Talmudic Judaism. The Moel school is actually in London. The Moel school of Europe is in London. So a lot of these Moels actually were doubling as surgeons in the 19th century when skin grafting became a thing with Western European and American surgeons. So that's where they got the idea to mix, confuse, appropriate. I think that's where it really came from, was just you had people that were doing religiously based cutting ritual, but they were also practicing medicine in their spare time too. They were doing both.
Right.
And so they coached people up on how to just use the C word. So that's an interesting journey to go through this and discover the history of surgery. And even oddly enough, with Foragen at the Intag Global Conference, they're using a cadaver model. They're decellularizing and recellularizing. It's interesting that I was an Italian surgeon, and PC Rem was from Bologna, Italy. And that was a region of Italy that was known for, they had carried plastic surgery on since the days of the Romans. And all they were doing, they were just using more autografts, an autograft just using your own skin. The concept of transplantation from another human or even animal grafting.
I've never heard this avenue of thought of how circumcision became popular was a donor for skin grafts. I always thought about it the other way around.
I think you have to realize too, I'm not trying to knock on anybody, but I think if you look at some of the original activists, especially from California, there are a few, I'm not going to name them, but they've actually admitted on record to actually having been part of the problem. They've been nurses or doctors and at some point they were someone's assailant. Mm-hmm. So I think as a result of that, it's a lot of their rhetoric, what they're saying, it is a good point to say, but they don't want to self-incriminate themselves. That's the way I would feel about it. They're not going to go down there and admit to violations of NOTA. And so I feel like there's been a lot of deflection going on and just some people talking in circles where it's, okay, we don't get to the bottom of what happened, why it's still going on.
They can't speak openly because it would incriminate themselves.
Exactly.
That's why. I understand that it's why circumcision continues. It's profitable, obviously. But the other aspect is that the entire medical institution would have to admit that they've been harming children for 130 years in the United States.
And basically, too, even some of the intactists that have come out that were in the medical industry, they've gotten their hands dirty at some point. just by their own admissions. So it's weird. I think that's why, despite the fact that UAG has been on the record since 1968, I feel I've seen this problem. I was involved with Uber and the taxis in San Francisco back when it all started.
Mm-hmm.
And I see these same type of problems in that movement where the taxis, I think just probably through their own ignorance, gotten themselves into legally ineffective rhetorics that didn't produce results. There were things they weren't looking at, but I learned those lessons and felt within taxi. I think there's a lot of people that get pointed to the Oregon, but I think that's the most easiest common way to engage and win the public and even win legally. It's just to actually, these are just blatant living donor rights violations.
A whole nother level to attack the harms that are happening to children today.
I think it's just in my donor boner thing. That's why I came up with it. I'm taking the South Park method towards, and just, hey, just laugh about it. Let's talk, call it the donor boner. That resonates with people. The shirt stands out. I had a test run last year and I got a different silk screener this year that smashed it out of the park with the black and yellow. I figured if I just go out and engage, I was a San Francisco taxi driver for 5 years, so I know how to gab with people and persuade. I figured, but God gave me these talents to go out there and to go do this. And it's a fun mission to be on, to go out there and just what? I'm actually going to go out there and engage in some serious asymmetrical activism and win people over.
For me, it's the standing on the street corner doing educational street outreach with the bloodstained men, using theatrical influences to gain attention and awareness to the harms happening to children 3,000 times a day in the United States.
I would think it'd be fun. I would see a bloodstained man, if you guys are up for it, to be wear bloodstained pants with a donor boner t-shirt, see if you have different engagement levels. But it could be a fun thing. And one of the things I do too when I'm doing this is once I tell people what I used to believe, if women ask me the question, if I'm circumcised, I was like, what? I tell them about what I discovered with the plastic surgeon starting this conspiracy in America. I misconstrued myself as circumcised, but when I got, I'm not, and they're wet. I tell them I got a donor boner and they start laughing. The women really enjoy the humor that they love. And then I tell people too, this procedure can also lead to high rates of ED, erectile dysfunction among men.
A 400% increase in erectile dysfunction. Yes.
I call that on my thing. What I call it? Donors without boners. That's a good way. I think that's
funny, but not funny.
That's what I use the dark satirical humor when people. One of the reasons I wear the dark shirt too is the way the black conveys. It's a way to acknowledge the theft. Really
we'll be in San Diego in October for the AA and surrounding areas for a whole tour. So if you can make it down to South California, you can join us.
Possibly. No, I actually just got hired by Tesla, and I think my schedule is Thursday through Saturday. So
okay.
I can do some stuff on Sundays. I go out there Sundays and Mondays, the earlier part of the week I'm game.
Absolutely. Come on.
It's funny because if we go to San Diego's where it's all started, dude. That's where PC Remendino that's where he started his whole conspiracy in San Diego. The Gilded Age surgeon. San Diego was the forefront. San Diego's ground zero.
Wow.
San Diego's where PC Remendino and his co-conspirators in Southern California, that's where they really pushed out their prepuce trafficking in the late 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of his co-conspirators were down in Pasadena, San Diego area, the greater Los Angeles, San Diego area. So going down there, you're going down to ground zero. I would challenge you guys to go do an event at the PC Remendino Library.
There's a PT Remendino library?
His private library is, I think, inside a university now.
That would be perfect. We could quote his book.
We could. I think that would be a fun place for Dent to have its first meetup.
Absolutely.
It's just this is where it all started, folks, right here. And just start. I think the donor. I'm ready to hit the ground running now. I got a little fortress built up in Reno.
Good.
So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Reno, I'm getting a lot of engagement on the shirt, but Reno, I think, is one of the lowest circumcision rate states in the whole country. Nevada, the most people I get that had it done to them were born in other states, California or something. So out here, but people do see the shirt, and it's one thing what I noticed: a lot of men have trouble reading the shirt. Women pick up on it instantly, but a lot of men
exactly what you mean.
A lot of men have trouble processing, even when I'm talking to them about it. I'm touching on some deep stuff with them.
It's a level of denial that they can't face for themselves.
Exactly. So I think with men deal more with denial on this, whereas women see the shirt and they're just like, whoa, what's that mean? And I'm sick of people stealing people's body parts.
It's interesting. It's the same. So we talk about the men in denial. And when I see interviews of female genital mutilation victims in other countries and see their interviews, and it's, oh, I'm cleaner, I'm fine, my daughter will be circumcised, my mother's circumcised, and we're fine. It's the same. It's the same exact rhetoric we hear from circumcised men here.
Exactly. Men misbranded as circumcised. In support to my movement, it's not a referendum on religious genital cutting. It's a referendum on medical professionals using the guise of a religious ceremony to harvest male prep uses of all ages. I think it's different about Dent. I've even done one case where I even did a federal criminal referral on a case where an Oregon prisoner as an adult male had scabies, and the doctor recommended a circumcision, and it's not medically indicated. And the prison doctor's actually under investigation for male-to-male sexual assault. And I'm starting to get some traction on it. I noticed some of the web sources that I've used, some of the really incriminating ones on Drug Bank, where they would actually let you freely go to their link and look up keratinocyte and neonate fibroblast, the drug codes for that. I have to log in and start an account now to actually go look at those websites now. Whereas before I didn't. Before I started doing this, I didn't.
Okay. So
as this information is getting some, I'm seeing some traction on the movement where we're starting to have a Time's Up movement. Time's Up, Men Too.
They're covering their tracks.
They're covering their tracks now, which is good. I think that the hashtags too for the donor boner would be "Let them feel, stop the steal." Stop the steal for elections or what. We'll put a "Stop the steal," put a picture of a baby boy, and "Let them feel." That was just. I think that's what my movement is. Just, hey, look, let's just get back to American medical freedom. And hey, if you want to donate your prepuce as an adult, go ahead and do it.
Absolutely. We're not against circumcision. I
think I'm against medical professionals using the term circumcision because they should just be, why can't it be just be prepuce donation?
Or, well, prepuce amputation. There's better words. And you don't the word circumcision because it's a euphemism, but I have to use that term because people don't know what we're talking about. Because if I say male genital mutilation, people don't even know what I'm talking about.
That's why I'm using the legalistic term "guise of circumcision."
Guise?
The guise of circumcision.
The guise of
circumcision. I say it's under the guise of circumcision.
I follow you.
So it's just like, that's why I use that term, just because I felt that's good. That catches the attention of law enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much the donor boner movement in a nutshell. I'm thinking it's going to be a lot of fun. It's definitely been an interesting journey, but I feel like, hey, if God put me on this path and have me be around a living donor, and I started my investigation as an adult in San Francisco right after they passed all this, and that woman that I talked to about being Jewish, what she did for a living, Dwayne?
No.
She was an assistant U.S. associate attorney.
Okay.
So I think the clues from the universe are there, bro.
Absolutely.
Don't know her name. I think there's a good window. Because even after, I remember they did the child autism thing and they talked about how males in California had a higher rate of autism last year. I tweeted to RFK on my own Twitter, hey, they recommend Tylenol after circumcision. And a few weeks later, that was on national TV.
But the thing of it is that they're mosing these children as autistic, in my opinion, because they can't make eye contact. And really what I think it is, it's pre-verbal PTSD, because they were sexually assaulted and the only thing they could see was the assailant's eyes. So they're wearing something over their hair, they're wearing a mask. So the only thing that the child can see is the assailant's eyes while they're being genitally mutilated. And so they associate the eyes with this mutilation that has happened.
Oh, there's definitely a lot of unprocessed trauma. And the really amazing part too is you go into circumcision, they don't perform this stuff on the 8th day anymore after birth. It's turned into an immediate postpartum within 24 hours thing. And even with the autism thing, it was just, I've done some, it's like off the subject, but I've done some things. There's actually a guy, Larry Cook on Twitter, who's been doing the Fiji water cleanse, where he's actually taken autistic kids and got them up to verbal, because his theory is Fiji water has the highest amount of silica for any like bottled water, and silica removes aluminum. And it's part of the heavy metal theory poisoning from all the vaccines too. The aluminum, high silica drinking water, and part of the protocol to doing that was just to make sure that you're in an area that has unfluoridated water, because fluoride in toothpaste or water, that makes the body absorb aluminum at twice the rate. But autistic child's drinking out of soda cans at the school bake sale, and they take a bunch of cookies off of aluminum foil. That's going to keep bringing in fresh aluminum. And the silica would make the body excrete it. That's been a trip being in the medical freedom movement and activism. I find it ironic.
Well, it's totally ironic because it's totally fine to cut the genitals of a baby. Oh my God, we can't talk about cutting the genitals of babies.
So I find that really interesting that a lot of the guys that claim to be red pill on this, they just put their heads on the sand on this one. They don't want to talk about it, but I think it'd be a lot of fun. We could just go in there, and the dent thing I think is going to be a lot of fun. It's really easy to get traction. I accidentally went to West Hollywood location of like a dinner event in LA, a heavily gay area. A lot of like older gay men were taking interest in my t-shirt. What's it about? What's going on? There's actually a lot of, within that community, there's a lot of people who are pro activism.
Remind us what DENT stands for?
Donor Equality Network Team.
Donor Equality Network Team. And have you got a social media wrapped around that yet?
Not yet. I'm in the process of getting all that expedited.
Okay.
Because originally last year, it's like I had thought about having the donor boner website, and I got the domain for that. But now I'm thinking, if I'm going to like read about your guys' adventures in the South and more conservative areas, I can follow it online on Twitter and whatnot. I'm like, dude, I'm going to do something where I can slip in there and just go very symmetrical and talk about living donor rights and organ trafficking. Yeah, that's one of the ways I keep the cops off it's a way to disarm law enforcement too. It's just a donor equality movement. I'm talking about kids, victims. I know how to play that game just from being a taxi driver in San Francisco.
I hope that I see you next year giving a presentation at Intact Global Conference.
I think it'd be a little interesting. I know Eric's a good friend of mine because he's represented me. He's been like my lawyer too. And it's some of the stuff we're working on is very stealth. I think it's going to be a really great time to be an activist and take this donor aspect of it to another level. I'm thinking of myself as like maybe Mace Windu from Star, the purple lightsaber. It's like the red and the blue one put together. I'm using both sides of the force on this. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think some Bloodstained Man supporting a donor boner t-shirt, I think it's going to rock.
Well, I look forward to seeing you more, and I want to be respectful of your time and our viewers' time.
For sure.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you.
It's great seeing you, Dwayne. We'll link up again.
Absolutely. I hope we will do this. We'll have another interview soon.
For sure. All right. Be well.
Take care. Thank you.
All right.